Did you know that artificial eyes have been around since as early as the 5th century BC? But how are they made and who makes them? Today we're going to talk to Marcus Soper, who is an ocularist. What is an ocularist, you ask? We're about to find out a lot more about artificial eyes and the practice of ocularistry. Mr. Soper?
I want to talk to you.
Not now, later.
No, now.
All right, today our guest is going to be Mark Soper. Mark Soper is an ocularist, and we're going to get into today describing what ocularist actually is. So, Mr. Soper, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
So why don't we start with just an introduction about you, and then we'll talk a little bit about what an ocularist does.
I'm Mark Soper. I'm board certified ocularist, starting in practice 43 years ago. I'm part of a family group. My father started the practice in 1948, and we've continued on from there. I have an associate that's a board certified ocularist as well, and we're situated here in Houston.
Very good. Well, let's talk a little bit about what an ocularist is, because I would imagine that that's a term that not everybody has heard before. So tell me, what is an ocularist? What is it you do, Mr. Soper?
An ocularist is an individual who designs, fabricates, and dispenses artificial eyes for an individual who's either lost their eye from, let's say, a disease or trauma, something to that effect.
So talk to me about when we're talking about artificial eyes. First of all, like I think people understand the concept of a prosthetic eye, but let's talk about physically what are we talking about here?
An artificial eye actually fills the void that is lost from the loss of an eye. It's a device that we make from a mold of the eye socket, and it refills that void, as I mentioned. It's made of plastic, and what we're doing aesthetically is trying to match the fellow eye, both in iris color, the white of the eye, and more importantly, the shape of the opening of the lids and the fold of the superior lid.
Well, and this is something that I'm somewhat familiar with myself. Not everybody knows this, but our president and CEO of our company actually has a prosthetic eye. Actually, I believe your father may have been the first one to make it for her. And so I've actually seen these before. And when I was a kid, I always imagined that you hear the term glass eye, right? And I had always imagined a sphere of some size, some form that would actually sit in the eye. But that's not the case, is it?
No, when an eye is removed, or an eye is damaged and blind and disfigured, you have a prosthetic. When the eye is removed, you have a prosthetic implant placed within the tissue that mimics and replaces the volume of the eye that was removed. So you think of it as somewhat of a tissue formed globe. In the people that we work with that have a disfigured eye, there is actually a globe there. And so in both of those cases, we're fitting over those surfaces. So it's not a ball as many people would think. It's more of a semi-shaped shell or great big contact lens that fits over that implant or disfigured globe.
So for you ocularists, when you talk about that you're making this eye and you're saying that you're going to make it match the other eye, and that's the idea here. How are you doing that exactly? Are you printing these? Are you painting them? How does that work?
Well, first we create a custom template that incorporates the use of an impression of the eye socket, and we sculpt and mold a wax duplicate of that impression to actually fit the eye socket and to flush fit so that there's no spaces between the eye socket and the prosthesis itself. So it's a sculpting process, and then from that, we will make, using what is called the lost wax method, we will make a plastic artificial eye. Within that artificial eye, then we incorporate iris painting, scleral painting, and in our particular situation, we actually have developed a enhanced digital process that we use. All of that is incorporated into the plastic artificial eye and actually placed in their anatomically proper position. Now, it's not painted on the surface or anything like that. It's inside the eye. And then the final coating of clear plastic is over the surface, much like the bulbar conjunctiva or clear layer of tissue that covers the eye. So it truly is actually constructed in a very anatomically correct way, and it is molded to the eye socket.
So how long does that process take? So you're talking about that you've got to take molds of the eye socket, that the whether you're doing it digitally or however you're getting it on there. How long does it take from start to finish, from when somebody comes into your office to when they have a prosthetic that they can use?
Our process, and this may change from Ocularist to Ocularist, but our process is 3 days. The first day is about an hour and a half to 2 hours long, where we make the impression of the eye socket and shape of the prosthesis. On the second day, it's mostly painting. We've actually produced the plastic prosthesis and then incorporating the artwork into it. And then on the third day, we actually dispense the prosthesis. Now, in each of those days, overnight, we are actually processing plastic. We make a stone casting of the initial model. Removing that, the lost wax method is such that you take it out of the casting, and we polymerize plastic within that casting. Overnight, it sits in a pressurized polymerization unit that actually hardens the plastic, so that the next day we remove it, trim it, and do our painting. So the second night, it goes back into that stone casting, and clear plastic is polymerized over that surface. And final day, it's polished and finished out where the surface is glass-like. It's plastic, but the surface is glass-like, where it's completely smooth. There's no defects in the surface. And it's what we like to have is close to a perfect surface as we can. Having a perfect surface lends itself to better health of the tissue lining the eye socket and the lining of the lids.
Well, let's explore that topic a little bit, because this is another thing that I had a question on when it comes to prosthetic eyes. So when somebody has a prosthetic, is this something they keep in all the time, or is this something that they put in during the day, take out at night? How does that work for them as far as taking it in and out?
It's very important to us that the prosthesis be worn continuously. Insertion and removal on a daily or weekly basis actually can create an adverse effect from the eye socket. The body will secrete a biofilm that coats the prosthesis and makes it compatible with the tarsal conjunctiva or lining of the eyelid. If it takes 24 to 48 hours for that to really form, if you were removing the prosthesis every day, which people would think would be logical, but removing it and so-called cleaning the surface, you are actually removing good bacteria. And when you replace it, the body secretes more, trying to coat the prosthesis. We've seen many people that come in and have chronic problems with discharge from the eye socket. And I say, well, how often do you remove it? Oh, 6, 7 times a day, because I have so much stuff coming out of the eye socket. Well, they're creating their own problem. Typically, we see people for follow-up every 6 months, at which time we check the way that the prosthesis fits, we disinfect the prosthesis, and resurface it. The majority of our clients only have their prosthesis out when they see it. So it's worn continuously, and it's best done that way. Another situation is in cases of infection and so forth that may occur. People are often told, well, take the prosthesis out and leave it out while it heals. That makes good common sense, but in reality, as that tissue heals, it contracts or shrinks, and then we don't have the same socket in which to work with following the clearing of that infection. So the infection should be treated with the prosthesis in place, and most importantly, the prosthesis needs to be checked that the surface quality is good and so forth.
So when somebody has a prosthesis in their eye, and this may be an ignorant question on my part, but what's holding it in there? Is it just the eyelids themselves? Is it attached somehow? What holds the prosthesis in there?
There are implants that actually have stems coming from them that you can attach the prosthesis to. That's not done too routinely these days, but in general, it is the eyelids that hold it into place. Much like a contact lens is held into place, which floats on top of the eye, the prosthesis is held in place by the lids. If you pull your bottom lid out and look down to the bottom of the eyeball, you'll see a little furrow called a fornix, or cul-de-sac. And that's 360 degrees around the implant that is formed, and the prosthesis fits in that cul-de-sac with it being retained by the lid.
I thank you so much for sharing that information. I think a lot of these are a lot of these preconceptions that people have because you watch cartoons or whatever, but it's certainly not the case, right? It's very intriguing to me, frankly.
The eyeball rolling across the floor is not at all the case.
That's not the case. So let's switch gears a little bit. We've talked about infections that can come, and I don't think, as you said, these are not common. But what are some of the things that maybe somebody that has a prosthesis may deal with that other people don't deal with?
Well, people actually deal with this, which is seasonal allergies. But we have a terminology that we use, which is called SAP, S-A-P, like sap from a tree. We call it seasonal airborne particulates. And the person wearing an ocular prosthesis can have, during seasons of allergies and so forth, these airborne particulates that get on the surface of the prosthesis and irritate the conjunctival lining of the lids. This irritation can then create discharge from the socket, and it's really just kind of an allergic response to the environment. Not an allergic response to the prosthesis, an allergic response to the environment. In those cases, we have some great products to use to keep the surface of the prosthesis clean, actually without removal. To give you a little bit of a commercial there, we routinely use in cases such as that, where there's a seasonal airborne particulates bothering somebody, we use a OcuSoft Lid Scrub Plus 50, which is the foam cleaner, and the wearer will actually apply it to the surface of the prosthesis, the lids and lashes, and then rinse it thoroughly. Other things that we do hygienically is that when an ocular prosthetic wearer sleeps, their eyeball, or your natural eyeball, rolls up under the lid so that the lid can completely close. That's called Bell's phenomenon. The ocular prosthetic wearer does not have that, Bell's phenomenon. So the artificial eye doesn't roll up underneath the eyelid and allow the eyelid to close. So the eyelid stays open very slightly at night. And with that, the natural tears, the oils, the mucus, so forth, in the tears harden and dry on the surface of the prosthesis and the lids and lashes overnight. Some people have more of a problem with this than others. Generally, it's usually not a big problem, but hygienically, we ask people that upon arising in the morning, use a warm face cloth, lay it on the surface of the prosthesis and the lids and lashes, and allow anything that has dried overnight to dissolve and be blotted away. So there's two things that we do in the case that there are some type secretions or so forth in wear of the prosthesis.
So, speaking towards that, is there anything special that needs to be done with the prosthesis itself? And again, this is ignorance on my part, but it seems like you've got some plastic in there. Does it function the same way as in terms of, are your natural tears and your natural lubrications functioning on that prosthesis the same way, or is there need for external lubrication of any form?
Well, importantly, with an ocular prosthesis is, of course, like anything else, the success of it can be debilitated by the quality of that surface. So in the manufacturing and finishing process, that surface, as we mentioned before, has got to be glass-like. If it's not, we create issues. Now, the tears form just like the natural eye. The tears form over the surface of the ocular prosthesis. However, if the globe has been removed or cornea severely damaged, there's not as much of the aqueous production within the tear as we would see in the normal eye. So we have more of a mucoid, oily tear layer with sometimes, a little decreased aqueous or water base in the tear. That lends us very well to using periodic artificial tears and many different products that can be used to lubricate that surface, just like we do with the natural eye, and they've been very, very successful in that scenario. Most people, well, actually, one of the greatest complaints of a prosthetic wearer is dryness. So there's a number of things we do to manage that, being drops, sprays, basically topical hygiene helps with all of that. But in general, people do quite well without a lot of maintenance. My father, our business began because my father lost his eye during World War II. And so he became an ocularist through his interest in that. And when I was training, I asked him, I said, "Hey, Dad, what's your eye look like in the morning?" And he looked at me very queer-eyed, and he goes, "I don't know, what's yours look like?" Because, the bottom line is we want the prosthetic wearer to basically function as normal, go about their business, and not really have to worry with things. There are, as we've mentioned, the cases where you do need some type maintenance or hygiene, but it's not, the best cases are those that say, I just don't even think about it, go about my way. And they don't think about it until they see us for some follow-up. That's the best case scenario.
It's interesting that you should say that because, as I told you, Cynthia, our president and CEO, has a prosthetic, which I'm sure you know. But it was probably, I think she and I had worked together for maybe 4 or 5 years before I ever knew that she had a prosthetic eye. And I think that speaks to some of what you're talking about, that like in most cases, like I could never tell. I mean, now that I know, like I can notice certain things, but like it was a long time. And had I not spoken to her about it, like I would have never known that she had a prosthetic eye. But I think that's kind of the point, right? That's what you're driving for.
And it's one of the things that we work with our patients is expectations and realization, realizing that, the people who we're trying to fool with the cosmesis and appearance of the artificial eye is not me. It's not the wearer. It's not the wearer's family. They know what's taking place. And if we sit close to them face to face and say, "Oh, this is a little bit different in this eye than it is that eye," and so on and so forth. Well, we know that if we take a picture of one half of our face and flip it over to the other side, where the two sides are identical, you look like a different person. On the case of an artificial eye, we're fooling the public. And if the public doesn't know about it, in the majority of cases, we can hide it quite well. The other thing that we demand of our clients is to wear a pair of spectacles. Those spectacles should have polycarbonate lenses in them to basically a safety precaution for the fellow eye. The other thing is that when you're wearing a pair of spectacles, as Cynthia does, and you have a prosthesis, people actually kind of look at the front of the spectacles more than they do the eyes. We can fool people all the time. Now, it's interesting, the prosthetic wearer will look out in the community and pick out everybody wearing a prosthesis, as to where you've maybe, like you said with Cynthia or others that you aren't even aware of, have dealt with them for years and you have no idea. Those are the greatest things that happen to us when they come in. No, nobody, we go to the eye doctor and the tech gets real upset because the eye won't die. So they go, that's our best judgment. That's the best thing that can happen. And I always tell them too, just for fun, I said, don't say a word. And when they're covering up the other eye, say, I can't see it.
So let's talk about that for a little bit too. So how often, if I get a prosthetic made, is that my prosthetic for life? How often do I need to switch it out? Or is there even a rule?
There's a quite general rule, but not true for everybody, not true for all age groups. But in general, we change the prosthesis every 5 to 8 years. Children, as they're growing, that could be more, you know, more often. Now, we will find that we need to make some alteration to the fit of the prosthesis every 2 to 3 years, and we'll do that. And then every 5 to 8 years, we find we really need to replace it. And this is due to change in the structural shape of the eye socket, shifting of fat. It's like the rest of our body. I'm sure if you look at me 8 years ago, I'm a much better looking guy. So those changes take place, and we have to change the prosthesis along with it. So in general, we're going to say 5 to 8 years. We don't continue to add to the existing prosthesis after a 3-year period because we're concerned with the viability of the plastic when we place it back under pressure and heat as we do in our polymerization process. So 5 to 8 years is a good general number that we use.
So as we're wrapping up here, I have some just general questions about your practice specifically. So is that all you guys do? Do you only make prosthetic eyes, or are there other eye care things that you deal with?
Well, we have a practice that we're quite lucky to have. It's all kind of family. My nephew's an ophthalmologist, and he practices along with us. My associate does 100% ocular prosthetics. I do 80% prosthetics, and about 20% I do in contact lenses, which are specialty contact lenses, typically for eye disease and so forth, for correction of vision. That is a big part of our company going back in history, and we continue with that. But the majority of our business is ocular prosthetics.
So how many prosthetic eyes are we talking about here?
I figure you're going to ask that, but people are typically amazed. Our average general week is that we're doing 6 a week. And people say, well, that's kind of a lot, particularly when we sit there and we're spending as much chair time and days with them. There's other practices that do far more. There's other, again, practices that do far less. We do our 6 a week based on what our process is and what we can manage through the laboratory and do the best job we possibly can. You might ask me, gosh, I had no idea there's that many people. They're there. And most of the time when people tell me, gosh, this is something else, I know you do prosthetics, and I'm sitting out in the waiting room, and I can't tell who has one and who doesn't.
What would happen if you didn't have a prosthetic? All right, so you had it filled in here, and I don't have a prosthetic. What would happen?
To say the biggest problem is that space is not filled, so there's sequestering of tears and so forth within the eye socket that can become very septic-like, the bacterial growth within that sequestration of tear. And that's probably the number one thing. The other thing is that in supporting the eyelids and putting them in the proper position, they function properly, discharge and move the tears as they normally do and should. And it makes the wearer much more comfortable. We said before, the wearer typically many of them only have it out when they're here to see us. And it's funny because you remove the prosthesis and they go, Mark, hurry up, get back, because they want it back in place. It's very unusual to have it out of place. So other than the cosmetic side, there is very much a health benefit and a benefit to the wearer that it puts things back into their anatomically normal perspective.
Well, as I said, that was not something that I was aware of, so that's very good information. Well, Mr. Soper, is there anything else that you think is important for people to know when it comes to Ocularis and what you guys do?
I think we've pretty well covered it. As I told you initially, you say, well, what is an Ocularis? underpaid, overworked idiots, I guess. They do go through a 5-year postgraduate internship sponsored through the American Society of Ocularists, which leads to board certification. And it's an educational process that most of them are very proud to have been part of.
Actually, let's expand on that a little bit. So you're training in Ocularis because a lot of what you're describing, there's medical aspects here, and there's craftsmanship aspects here too. So what does training to be an ocularist look like? Are we focused primarily on the eye, or are we focused primarily on almost engineering, so to speak?
Now it's all of the above, of course. Before we begin, we like to have a um, schooling background in preferably biological science. So you're coming to the table with some sense of biological, just biological background. So, but the way the training starts is very slowly, step by step by step through those 5 years. You may not even observe a client or patient for the first 9 months. We're in the laboratory repeating and repeating and repeating the processes in which we use so that they become second nature. It's very, very important to us the way we produce prosthesis and what happens in the laboratory. So we're going to begin on the laboratory side and the actual fabrication. Then we move into the actual fitting of the prosthesis, which I would consider making the impression, sculpting the shape, designing the prosthesis is your next situation, and then graduate on through follow-up and difficult cases. The educational process is an internship with a board certified ocularist, so we've got to find that first. And then the educational process through the American Society of Ocularistry is numerous things, many of which we've talked about today, but surgical backgrounds, what takes place during the surgery, problems that we run into and how they might be surgically fixed. But of course, we don't do any surgery or anything like that, but we're working along with the physician that does, and we understand that and know what the possibilities through those natures are.
Well, Mr. Soper, I tell you what, I have really been intrigued by this. I did not know half of this, and I think this is something that it's one of those things where you have a lot of assumptions, but to actually hear it, this is a very interesting topic. I never knew a lot of this stuff, and frankly, there are a lot of people that deal with it. And very interesting topic. So thank you very much for being with us today.
After this COVID stuff, we can get back together at a meeting and such, and we'll talk further.
Absolutely. Well, I will definitely look forward to it. But in the meantime, you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much.